There is always an economic concern attached to it. I would love to bring in everybody into my country, but does my own wherewithal, my own economic conditions, do they give me that strength and that latitude? Terrorism has become a major concern. So ultimately, it all boils down to national security. So even if the government of a particular country wants to participate, wants to go out of its way, but the internal fears and paramount being national security comes into play. And not only for the Rohingyas, in fact, the government of India has taken on itself on the Tibetans and the Sri Lankans, right? But a lot of assistance, support is being taken from the UNHCR. Where it comes to Afghanistan or the Chakmas or the people who are coming in from other areas, because we don't have a system in place to identify that who is a person who can be harmful. We have a large number of internally displaced people. India is an example, right? The people who were pushed out of their homes in Jammu and Kashmir. All intelligence agencies work purposefully in commonality, not only within the country, but with outside agencies. In fact, one of the concerns of India at the time of not signing the 1951 convention was this only, that the people who are actually creating these refugees are not being held accountable.
Hello, followers and patrons of Diplomacy Direct. As cliche it sounds, it's indeed a truth that when elephants fight, the grass suffers. In the wars of state or ideologies or political conflicts, it's the common population that suffers. Today, we are going to focus on a crisis in the backdrop of all that is on the forefront and covered by the media, but seldom gets the needed attention with the magnitude. I'm talking about the global refugee crisis. The number of refugees and internally displaced have doubled world over to 80 million as compared to in the past. And this has increased in the past decade. Understand, 50% of them are children. 1 in every 97 people in the world is now forcibly displaced, and analysts say that this may just accelerate. Amongst which are the nationals from Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Myanmar, the Rohingyas, Congo, Central Sahel, that is a region from Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. Somalia, Central African Republic, Burundi, Iraq, Ethiopia, Yemen, Palestine, etc., facing various issues from their homeland, ranging from civil war, terrorism, genocide, religious or ethnic cleansing, inflation due to corruption, climate change, etc., etc. These crises are followed or fueled by other issues and vulnerabilities lurking in the disguise that are antisocial elements entering into the asylum giving nations with the hordes of refugees with intention of terrorism or unrest. This makes the screening and acceptance process with the accepting nations a long and cumbersome venture, leaving the already despaired lot in transit, susceptible to falling prey to unfair labor, sexual exploitation, and other human rights violation, physical abuse, other atrocities, so on and so forth, right? In addition to that, there are climatic challenges and health insecurities. And to top it all, in these pandemic times, the infection risks have created a severe humanitarian crisis. Water plight. Hi, I am Vipul Tamhane, Editor-in-Chief at Diplomacy Direct, and to talk with us about this global issue and many related ancillary issues as the ticking time bomb, today we have Lieutenant General Anil Malik, a regal cavalryman who has served the nation for almost 4 decades in varied staff assignments, especially in peacekeeping operational areas. He commanded the 8th Light Cavalry as a colonel of the regiment, have commanded an armored brigade, an armored division as a part of a strike armored corps, has served in counterinsurgency operations as General Staff Intelligence Officer in a mountain brigade at the high altitude LAC, has served as a Director of Security Affairs at the Ministry of External Affairs, especially overseeing the defense cooperation with Eurasian countries. He has served in instructional capacities at Staff College Wellington, Commandant Staff College at Zambia, and Senior Directing Staff at National Defense College. His last appointment, though, before superannuation, was Director General Discipline, Ceremonials, and Welfare, which makes his perspective to be the best of strategic and empathetic value. Welcome, General Malik. A pleasure to have you on Diplomacy Direct.
Thank you, Vipul. Thank you for firstly giving the opportunity to share my views and think. For me, the subject is of deep concern, not only from the geopolitical environment that is occurred today, not only from the fact that it's a time bomb which is ticking, but also from the humanitarian point of view.
Absolutely.
It's a matter of great concern. So it's a pleasure to be here with you this evening.
Thank you very much, sir. The pleasure is all on our side. So getting right to it, the issues that these refugees face from wherever they are displaced and wherever they land, they are facing these vulnerabilities. What role does the governments of the asylum giving countries got to play, and what kind of acceptance reforms are warranted from rehabilitation and human rights perspective? And how do organizations like UNHCR or Amnesty International support and guide the governments in these efforts, basically under the guidance of United Nations Refugee Convention of 1967? Over to you, sir.
Well, to start with, I would like to emphasize that the 1951 UN Convention on Refugees, and which formed the backdrop based on the resultant effects of the Second World War, right? But between 1951 and as the years went by, you realize that there were much greater dimensions that had taken place. The refugees of that era were still in an acceptable mode because they belong to countries which has integrated into the system. But as the years went by, you realize that the scope need to be further widened. That's why the 1967 protocol gave an open-ended era. It also extended the geographical reach. It also made sure that areas of concern, which initially were restricted, had further widened and given it the complete emphasis. And that's why the 1967 protocol, in fact, those countries which did not initially sign the UN Convention 951, a lot of them ratified the protocol, which also meant that whatever was there in the 51 convention automatically became encompassed, and the United States is one such example, which had not originally is not an original signatory. We'll talk about India later, but for the time being, that being the backdrop, you realize that we had created an agency which could take an international view, could understand where the maximum pain areas were. They could share their views with the countries involved, as also make the governments understand that while the convention very well, but there were your own concerns. Every country has their own concerns.
Mhm.
right? The concerns could range from, I want to help.
Mhm.
I am a good human being.
Mhm.
I am a country which has a soft corner for people who are refugees, displaced, individuals, as well as the mass influx which takes place. And we are going through that era today. Right? So there is always an economic concern attached to it. I would love to bring in everybody into my country, but does my own wherewithal, my own economic conditions, do they give me that strength and that latitude? In a lot of countries, space itself may become a constraint. Then obviously there are going to be political overtones, there are going to be religious overtones. Um, this xenophobia it becomes a big concern in countries, because as we have grown over the years, past Second World War, we realized that we are gradually becoming very much sort of divided on issues of religion.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And without getting into specifics, but we all understand that a major concern today, and like you brought out in your introduction, terrorism has become a major concern. So ultimately, it all boils down to national security.
Yep.
So even if the government of a particular country wants to participate, wants to go out of its way, but the internal fears and paramount being national security comes into play. Now, that is where the international bodies have a major role to play.
Mhm.
They assist these governments in understanding that the people who are crossing over are not necessarily terrorists.
Mhm.
They are not necessarily people who are going to come and create problems in their country.
Mhm.
We've also got to understand, and these governments, some of them do understand, the rest have to be explained, that to put it in Hindi, ye khud bichare kismat ke mare hain. Where is the question of their getting involved in terrorist activities?
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
Now that is the backdrop, but in ground reality, it doesn't work that way.
Mhm.
Because such opportunities, when mass exoduses take place,
Mhm.
there are bound to be criminal elements. There are bound to be elements who, though they've just been displaced from their own country, would still like to continue their fight against the parent country.
Mhm. Mhm.
And two, because I think the religious divide, there may be people who enter your country in the garb of being innocent and oppressed, but actually maybe trying to cause trouble, or they may be in touch with the other agencies or other organizations which are creating problems.
Correct.
Right. So now these are the kind of concerns any government will have.
Correct.
And if those are the concerns, then there is obviously going to be a reluctance.
Correct.
So while it's very easy when 5 people cross over,
Yeah.
but there will be cases where thousands, and we are well aware of the figures
Mhm.
that people have been transiting in millions, have been crossing over. And in those millions, there are bound to be these other elements. So national security becomes the big concern.
Yes.
Number two, the division of resources.
Mhm.
I have a economy, or I have a kitty of $100, for example. Right. Now I need to take care of my people. There are people who are facing starvation. There are people who are facing water problems, associated natural calamities problems are there. There are problems within my own country. Right. Now, so my concern is, how do I take out a share of that money and spend it on you? And how do I justify it to my people who are starving? So with these kind of concerns, there is reluctance.
Mhm.
But then let me assure you that majority of the countries who are the signatories to the convention have taken it upon themselves, right? And I would say with a lot of pride that a country like India, which is not even a signatory to these things, for reasons which can be discussed later, yet our record on rehabilitating these migrants, we may not have given them a refugee status as required by the convention, but then the kind of care we have taken them, and examples starting with the 1959 exodus from Tibet, right? We know today that nobody feels that the Tibetans are not part of this country, or that it is not our responsibility.
Absolutely.
So that is a aspect which has been handled so brilliantly by these governments. Yes, wherever, of course.
And if you look at Dharmashala, the cultural inclusion is so homogeneous that, like you rightly said, we don't feel that they are outsiders. Matter of fact, they are among one of us.
Not only McLeodganj, but I'm based in Delhi, so I know that in North Delhi there is this place where we went a lot to eat Tibetan food, right? And you don't even feel that you're in a different country, right? Right next to the ISBT bus area. So they've been well absorbed into the system because there was a will and a willingness and a concern for them. But this doesn't always happen, right? We've had, and now we have the current issue of the Rohingyas, right? Where the major concern is national security. So there's a reluctance, though the government in this particular situation, and not only for the Rohingyas, in fact, the government of India has taken on itself on the Tibetans and the Sri Lankans, right? But a lot of assistance, support is being taken from the UNHCR. Where it comes to Afghanistan or the Chakmas or the people who are coming in from other areas, because we don't have a system in place to identify that who is a person who can be harmful.
Absolutely.
Right. So we are taking expertise. So these organizations, which we mentioned, UNHCR, Amnesty International, and there are a whole lot of these international NGOs, some Indian organization also participating, who fully assist the government in making that IT. And there are a number of cases.
And there are these frameworks that these organizations come with that they have implemented as a templatized implementation in these other countries. But our government, where it faces is the budget dilution, as you rightly put forward. And also the resettlement initiatives are for sharing the risks. That means supporting the stability of the allies or the partners struggling to host the large number of migrants.
Absolutely. And let me tell you that if they did not perform the way they were expected to, even a country which is a signatory may just decide to, all it needs is to give an application that I do not want to be part of this convention anymore.
Absolutely.
So these organizations have to be very cautious in how they support the government stand. Yes, there will always be differences of opinion. There will always be, they may not understand your concern, and the government may not understand their concerns. But these are all resolvable issues. And that's why there is a lot of synchronization that has taken place across the globe, right? We know that in the United States, the president, after getting approval of the Congress, fixes a quota every year of the number of people who are going to be given a refugee status. I think now this year is about 125,000 is the figure for this year, which for 1922 is going to be increased double perhaps. But then even a country like the US with its resources, with its
and then they have also prioritized, the translators, the helpers to the army, and everything. And then when that quota gets, so there is a lot of templatization in that also. Sir, a quick question before we move to the national security crisis part of our conversation. With almost 2/3 of the displaced populations are trapped within their own national borders, trying but not getting accepted by the asylum countries. Like we were talking about the processes and everything taking time. What kind of treaty will UNHCR need to bring with the governments, and is UNHCR effective in this effect?
Well, the IDPs or the internally displaced persons, right? As we understand, they could be because of external factors. They are not being accepted by the other countries. We are aware that this whole process of screening, identification, taking away people who do not deserve to be brought in, right? The whole process can take years. In fact, I read somewhere that the process adopted by the US for bringing in people from the Middle East takes nearly 36 months. Firstly, for those 36 months, you are in your own country, internally displaced. Two, then we have, even other countries, we have a large number of internally displaced people. India is an example, right? The people who were pushed out of their homes in Jammu and Kashmir, right? In fact, they have been living in these settlement camps, some of them for nearly 20 years.
Yeah.
Right. While from jhuggies to tents, they may have gone into some better accommodation, right? But the fact of the matter is that they are also internally displaced. The third category is that those who crossed over to another country, right? But they've been pushed back.
Yeah.
So once they get back here, they now become internally displaced, right?
Correct.
So now, but the problem here lies in the fact that if they are internally displaced, in the first place, what was that crisis which made them want to get out from there? Is that crisis over and are they allowed to settle down? Two, are they acceptable in that country? Right. So, and those particular countries, maybe the fear of prosecution still exists. So there's still nowhere to go, right? And let's say, for example, if you were to take the Rohingyas and try and push them back to Myanmar, it's not going to happen that easy. Supreme Court or anybody can say whatever they want. Yeah. It's not going to happen that simply. Now, to get the support by the UNHCR of those countries which they are internally displaced, one, they were displaced because of the condition. Two, they are displaced because of the economic issues, or because of the climate effect, or because of natural disasters that take place. Now, those who are from those kind of things, economic and thing, with the support and coordination with the international agencies, they perhaps may be absorbed back into their society. They may be given home. They may be given absorbed back into the healthcare system. What are their concerns after all? Education, healthcare, and shelter, right? And jobs, right?
Absolutely.
So to some extent, this could be overcome. But in the case of countries where they've been displaced because of internal dimensions, I'm afraid it's not going to happen in that simple a manner. Right?
Correct. And the governments, from the national security, now stepping into national security point of view, extrapolating your point, the government's saying that if not the humanitarian reasons to absorb them, but for practical reasons, because they have to accept the refugees, if they don't, ISIS or someone else will get them up, right? So it's a dual-sided sword. Sir, now Trump has always been criticized for his rhetoric of radicalized individuals entering as asylum seekers. However, this has been true and backed up by the data, like the Cato Institute observes that 88% of post 9/11 terrorist plots uncovered or incidences reported were with involvement of refugees. And the cases have come up where they have started sleeper cells for terrorist organizations. Here, the governments, the mechanism faces a dilemma between national security interests and providing amnesty and humanitarian aid. What kind of governance mechanism will it take to steer clear of certain dangers?
I'm not too sure of what Cato has to say on this, right? In fact, Cato's statistics have not really stood the test of time. Studies which have been carried out in the United States after 2017 have shown that the involvement of refugees in any kind of terrorist act has been minuscule. If I'm not mistaken, the figure given was 1 in 9.5 billion of an involvement. In fact, wherever you are able to absorb the refugees into the mainstream, their individuals can be there. You can take these kind of figures, 1 is to 9.5, 1 is to 13.5. This will happen anywhere, right? So, like you mentioned some time back, if I don't treat these guys well, ISIS will take care of them, right? But if I handle them well, which a lot of the intelligence agencies, the CIA, the FBI, they have actually made great use of the refugees.
Correct. So globally, the asylum-giving nations are successful in combating and minimizing the radicalization by humanitarian aids as a settled population, because they also help in a way, one, to be grateful, right, and do their part by turning into government informants, so keeping a check internally, and running anti-radicalization campaigns internally, and basically the cultural assimilation programs, right? So yeah, that's one point of view.
Yeah, there are two more points I'd like to make on this. One is that moment we get out of this phobia that every person of X community is a terrorist. Right? A thought process which has gradually stepped into and seeped in, and it's gradually seeping in even in our country. If you start off with that kind of a thought process, then I'm afraid that you will find that you will become, these people will become easy prey to the terrorist organization. Right? That is one point. Secondly, you would find that there are a lot of people. After all, a lot of these refugees have been created in an environment by the push and the involvement of some of the bigger powers, right? Whether it's Europe or it's the United States, a lot of external factors, right? What happened in Syria, the Iraq, Afghanistan, right? There are external factors. And a lot of these people who are now seeking asylum are those guys who are working for these bigger countries in supporting them. So they were the first to look to run for the planes, to get into the planes, to get out of that environment. So this is bound to happen. Now, as far as the system is concerned, it's firstly the biggest thing is unless you get out of the politics of it, unless you make the common man understand that these people, everybody's not bad. Everybody is not a national security threat.
Yeah.
Right. There are people who come innocent. Delhi was famous for getting all their pista, badam, and pomegranates and from Afghanistan. Right. Now, today, when that person is thrown into your lap, he suddenly doesn't become a threat to you. If you
so it's a game. It's a game of marginal threat perception.
Yeah, absolutely, and we should look at for that. There is enough people within your country who are part of the sleeper cells, who've been absorbed in. Nobody even declared that they were coming in. So if I have to indulge in this kind of thing, I don't have to declare that I'm going to come in here now. Give me a rubber stamp, and I'm going to now work against you. It can happen, but a very rare thing which can happen. Right? Most of them are concerned about their families, their children. Like you said, 30% are children.
50%, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, 50% are children, and the women. They've come looking for homes. I would rather live with my family. Somebody would rather live something. Okay, there will be indoctrinated people who can create problems, but then there are systems in place in every country, including ours, which will take care of that, right? And there will be mishaps which will happen. There will be tragedies which will take place with or without refugees.
Correct.
So let's not forget the humanitarian thing, and national security should be a concern. Yes, the government of that country should have the right to take a decision, right? Till you take that decision, you still take care of them, which we all do, right? And let me tell you that no country in the world can prevent this. When it comes as a mass exodus, you can't prevent it. When individuals want to creep in, they will beat the systems.
Correct.
Right? So we need to strengthen our security system. We need to have systems in place which will take care of that.
So looking at the entire refugee scenario, now we'll talk about like we were talking about this some time back. So threat perception, let's get into a bit into details. Sir, can you throw some light on what can be the risk assessment protocol? Now I'm getting a bit technical. So what can be the risk assessment protocol by the joint efforts of say intelligence agencies, military, border security force, or refugee asylum control agencies of nations to effectively allocate security resources for this by the means of said governance?
Okay, so we'll specifically talk about India, right?
Okay.
Okay. As you know, we have very porous borders. We have, whether it be the western borders, the northern borders, in the east, we have countries where for ages we've had people being pumped in, not only as refugees, but also wherever we had militancy in the northeast, there were enough people who were coming across. So you had systems in place. So you had intelligence, proper coordinated intelligence. Even when it comes to the western borders, we are able to pinpoint as to where the terrorist camps are. We are able to pinpoint where movement takes place from. Right? But it's just that the vastness of the system sometimes prevents you think. After all, every inch can't be closed, right? We've had no incidents of people crossing over in Rajasthan or in Punjab today because we have systems in place. Then, and like I said, intelligence, all intelligence agencies work purposefully in commonality, not only within the country, but with outside agencies. And that is why, now let's get back to the refugee management aspect of it. This is why everything becomes a close-knit pursuit of the international community, right?
Correct.
So if I may not have the information, there'll be another agency which will be able to give me information. Okay, look, these are the refugee camps. In fact, today you are a lot of times able to anticipate that 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 1 year from now, there is going to be a situation.
Correct.
There is going to be an exodus, right? Taliban taking over in Afghanistan, right? everybody, I'm sure even a school student could predict it, right?
Correct.
Whether it would have taken 3 months as it took, or whether it would have taken a year, it was bound to happen. Now, we are also aware that should that situation happen, there will be exodus of things. So the countries immediately bordering them, right, were able to put their systems in place. Right? So for India.
So basically, even India adopted the SNRA, the Strategic National Risk Assessment, as a scientific method to gauge what are the threats and hazards.
Yes.
And that is how our, the evacuation processes and everything were very deliberately and very, methodically carried out for, again, threats that pose the greater risks for national security itself. So,
see, I'll just switch over to the Rohingya. Right?
Yeah.
We all know their background. They're stateless people. The government of Myanmar for centuries has not accepted them. Right? They say these guys are Bangladeshis. Those guys say no. We have our roots in the Arab domain. In fact, a number of people of this lot were not only Muslim, but they're also Hindus, right? Two, our common border with the Chin province. The people of Mizoram have an ethnic affinity with the Chin population, right?
Correct.
So if there are bound to be spillovers. They are bound to have people, in spite of every security agencies, there will be people who will cross over because of the support that they'll get from the ethnic local population.
Right? Correct. So the Nagas, the Kukis, the Chins, this is happening for quite some time.
It's been happening for quite some time, and it's a natural phenomena.
Yeah.
Right. There are people, we take POK, right? There are families which live here, their families live on the other side. Tomorrow, if all of them decided that they're going to cross over, and if we remember, a big procession took place in Uri many years back, right? So you can't thereafter say, okay, now today morning I'll put the entire BSF here, or I'll put the Assam Rifles, or I'll put the army there and make sure that not one man is going to cross over. It doesn't work this way, and it's never going to work. We don't want to be part of any genocide taking place on those eras. Exactly. But the security apparatus, there are systems in place. The security apparatus is able to identify, they are able to make out what is going to happen. That is the first thing. Two, that this exodus is going to start happening. We are able to predict that. And thereafter, they are being monitored at every stage. Right. These systems are not in the public domain for obvious reasons. Right.
Correct.
But the systems exist.
Yes. And when you say it's a system, it's a mechanism, but it is not very technical, and it's not supposed to be that way, because empathy is a very crucial factor or a facet of it. Because the national security mechanism should have this understanding that the correlation between the terrorists and the refugees is that terrorists create refugees, right?
Okay. Terrorists thing. In fact, one of the concerns of India at the time of not signing the 1951 convention was this only, that the people who are actually creating these refugees are not being held accountable. And obviously, they were talking about the big powers, right? So, but that's the way the system works. But let me tell you, over the years, with the technology having become a major thing, everything is in place. It's being monitored. It's not to lose numbers all over the place. The fact that 7,000 Rohingyas are lodged in a camp in Jammu, right? It's not that 7,000 loose people were spread out all over the country and descended into Jammu. Okay. Obviously, it's like a systematic way in which they were kept there, right? Today, it may have started causing concern, but the fact of matter is that they are under supervision. They are under thing. And so national security our national security system is well absorbed. It understands where things are going likely to go wrong, and we do take preemptive actions.
So, sir, as you mentioned sometime back, with the Rohingya spillover in the Indian borders, also the Afghan refugees that we've accepted, what steps that we've been discussing have been taken by Indian government and the military jointly? And is there a combined mechanism that has been put in place for the entered individuals and their employment, affiliations, and subsequent activities and engagements, and to monitor all these things?
Let's talk about the Afghans first, right?
Okay.
Firstly, India's association with Afghanistan, India's commitment to Afghanistan is well known, right? Our own interests have been openly talked about, and we have accepted that there are interests there, right? So the population of Afghanistan, not from today, but for ages, in fact, a very unique bonding exists between the people of India and that of Afghanistan. You got to go down again to, I keep quoting Delhi because it's easier to have a look. Go down to Lajpat Nagar in Delhi and you'll see the way the Afghans have been integrated in the system, right? A lot of them are still asylum seekers, right? That's the first category. They're not yet become refugees, right? So the system has accepted that there are more refugees, as if situation deteriorates further, if they face hardships. A lot of them, who wants to leave his home and come?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? Whether it is Taliban in power or it's even the Hindus and Sikhs, till they were specifically targeted, did not leave Afghanistan. Present crisis, some of them have left. Some of them are still there, right? Okay, gradually over the years, this has deteriorated. The numbers have decreased, but they're bound to come. Now here, the government has accepted that they are going to come. So that's the first point. So therefore, the security agencies and the intelligence agencies have their charter very well fixed to monitor. And most of these refugees have either been coming from crossing across from Pakistan or through proper flights, land and sea routes as entries, right? So it's not something which is hidden, right? So the military per se is not directly involved in all these things. Okay? They may have a certain segment of the border, which in the northern areas, which you're supposed to look after. But they do not have an indication. Now, the government of India has tied up very well with the UNHCR that the identification process, which is a mandatory requirement to be able to identify, understand their concerns, are fully in place. Right. Now, as far as the Rohingyas are concerned, there is still that phobia which exists. Everybody knows that they are homeless people. We have cases in Supreme Court, 21st April 2001 judgment of the Supreme Court that deport them back because of national security thing is already under challenge, right? Because the government of India also accepts that while we don't want them here, but Supreme Court also said that they are to be deported provided all conditions are met. Okay, I may not remember the exact wording, but generally this is what is said. Right. Now, all conditions being met, a deported person can only be deported to the country where they are being deported is going to accept them. Right. So, for the time being, they're going to be there.
Correct.
Right. So, they're gradually, after all, once they're there, the first concern of the government will also be they must be given food. They must be given water, they must be given food and essential health care.
Correct. So basically the rationing and bringing them into a general data is important. And once that is done, we know the numbers, we know how the governance is to follow with these individuals, what areas and everything, and then it is easy to monitor.
Yeah, but the one thing that is of concern in the Indian environment is that fair enough, for reasons we did not become signatories or did not ratify these UN Convention and the 67 Protocol. But what is important is that within the country, this business of central government versus state governments, politics versus religion has to be looked at in greater detail. And therefore, there's a very important necessity of having a domestic law, which ensures that everybody, whether it is the custom guy at the airport, or whether it is the man at the border, the guy who's monitoring the sea, the Coast Guard, or anybody for that matter, the state government officials work on one platform.
Also, maybe a general general information or a general sensitization to the general public, the general citizens, is also that, okay, these are the kind of people coming in, these are the situations, these are the scenarios, this is what an empathy guides them. But also, if you come across a certain segment of people, maybe according, the way they dress, or maybe some facial features and something of that sort, and if there are some concerns that come to your notice, then this is the next protocol as a general citizen.
Absolutely. See, we have this. Today we sort of put everybody in the same bag and say Foreigners Act, Passport Act. These are the ones applicable to it. But we have to differentiate, because not only for two reasons. One is this asylum seekers, migrants, right? Equally important is the internally displaced people. Now, we've been through this pandemic, the corona era. The mass exodus of people who left their places of work to get back to their villages, right? Because we did not have a proper act in place as to how are they going to be monitored, how are their wives and children going to be looked after, is this a controlled exodus going to take place? Let me tell you, if the government had not pulled up its socks at that stage, and if the NGOs and I would say a lot of the corporates had not got involved into it.
Absolutely.
You can understand the dimension that it could have taken.
Yep.
Right. It could have taken a very nasty turn. So therefore, there is absolutely no doubt there has to be rules and regulations. Now, Government of India says deport X people, right, from Manipur. The Chief Minister Manipur says, "Oh, my dead body." The Mizoram government says, "I'm not going to deport anyone."
Yeah.
Because these are ambiguous. There is an ambiguity.
Correct. And then amongst these ambiguities, like you said, there is a cultural overspill from the border, and then you face issues like how they are facing at, like you said, Manipur. So they are facing at, say, something like More border or Kudantabi,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, correct.
See, one of the ways is, say, the government of Bangladesh. They are the country which is, whatever the term is, the biggest refugee camps in the world, right? And now while they are making all attempts to convince the government of Myanmar, in any case, their relations are never too healthy on the economic side, but they have taken this business seriously. What is the new? They've shifted a whole lot of them to this island about in the Bay of Bengal. Whole lot of these people have been shifted out from the mainland, from Cox's Bazar, and sent on to this Basun Par or someplace. The name there, I'm fighting the name. Right. So that's now become an organized thing. I think we need to. We know that they're going to come. Okay. One of the methods of preparation is that you make sure that the arrangements are in place. If a country like India can house 90,000 prisoners of war after the 1971 war in state-of-the-art PW camps, and I've had the privilege of visiting some of them, where all facilities were put into place. Yet there was a system to the whole thing. Similarly, by the time we deport all these guys, let's say Supreme Court still insists, no, send them back. Government of India says, no, we're going to send them back. We're not going to put these whole lot into some truck and say, okay, leave them at the border and go away. You know, incidentally, I remember that a lot of these Bangladeshi refugees, illegal immigrants, would come to work in fields in Punjab when the crop season was there. And when caught, they would be pushed across the border to the other side. And the next thing that used to happen, they would be pushed back this side. So this was a game that used to continue. We would not accept them. They would not accept them. And what's happening to the poor guy?
Yeah.
So let's look at it in a more humanitarian and a practical. I would more than humanitarian, I can even say in a more practical manner. By the time,
for a last note,
yeah,
how do we balance this humanitarian versus national security? How do you sum up this thing?
Yeah. Okay. My take on this is this: the people who are here. That's the status. If they are here, the humanitarian thing comes. They need food, water. Then starts all the paperwork, all these things, trying to establish who is clean and who's not. Right. That process itself, like I said, is time consuming. Everything takes time. Even though we've taking the support of the UNHCR for this purpose, the fact of the matter is it gets prolonged over years. A lot of them don't have documents. It's not easy to say, okay, so I'm so-and-so, here's my passport.
Correct.
People have left their homes with just one pair of clothes, perhaps, or not even that. Right. So what documents is going to produce?
Yeah.
So what verification are we talking about? The verification will take time. Now, if they're going to take time, then we must have a system in place that, all right, they will be brought here, they will be given their, we don't want these guys to spread a pandemic in our country.
Correct.
So they have to be looked after. So healthcare has to be provided. Food has to be provided. उसके बाद देखेंगे कि now we don't have to get too much involved. Today the electronic media will give you even means for educating the children, right?
Correct.
So why deprive the children of education? You don't have to start a school, right? But they are there. In Karnataka, I think there are about 20 schools which are there for the Sri Lankan thing. Even for Rohingyas, the schools have come up. Right? So these things will happen. National security, yes, most important. You cannot afford to let down your guard.
Correct.
And for that, constant monitoring. There will be people, I mean, from these agencies which are responsible, the security agencies, who would form part of the camp. They're part of the system. You can, a well-trained man can make out that this chap can create mischief or he can't create mischief.
Correct. And there is a certain handshake between the state and the central mechanism.
Yes.
Both from the security perspective also and from the governance perspective also. So, sir, we cannot talk about national security without talking about human security. That is why we don't face choice in our values and national security. Our values as Indians, are the drivers of our security, and these two things actually go hand in hand, and we can't lose that. If we lose that, we lose everything. So thank you so much, General Malik sir, for being on Diplomacy Direct and giving your valuable time.
Thank you. I think I was able to share my views. Like I said in the beginning, this is a subject of great concern to me. I would say I'm a beginner in the subject with such a vast thing, and I am doing some more study on it. Looking at doing more serious study on it, maybe some formal reading also. But fact of the matter is that this is a concern for everyone.
So this is an ever-growing matter, and nobody can be a real Pandit on this at any given day.
Yeah, right. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, and a pleasure to interact with you. I'm sure there are more issues that we could discuss, more things of concern both to you, me, and the common man, right?
Absolutely.
So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.